Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Kenya's Electoral Commission runs a simulation of electronic voting ahead of next week's general elections. Faith in the management of the polls had been rocked by the murder and torture of the IT chief in charge of the system. Meanwhile, campaigning heats up. Also, as Rwanda prepares for its presidential polls on Friday, there's little doubt about the outcome. Critics of incumbent Paul Kagame says he's locked out all competition from the race. He's clear that Rwandans want him at the helm. And despite ongoing violence in South Sudan, amidst civil war in the country's second largest town, some residents are ready to risk returning to try and rebuild. But first, in Kenya, the autopsy on the murdered IT systems chief who had been in charge of the electronic voting system for next Tuesday's general election has shown that he was tortured and then strangled. Chris Misando's death has ramped up tensions over the vote and raised questions about the transparency of polls. On Wednesday, the Electoral Commission ran a simulation on the biometric readers and electronic transmission equipment meant to prevent electoral fraud. Officials say that, despite a few hitches, the test was successful and that voters should be reassured.
This is the first time we are doing this massive results transmission from all over the country. We have invested so much in technology. Our election is partially technologically based. Other than the ballot paper, everything else is technology, and it's important to ensure that it works. It's also to build confidence among the stakeholders. So that is the main reason why we are here today. We are confident that everything will work out well, and as we have not just now, we have been testing it even before today, and we are sure that everything will work out well.
Well, Kenyans will be choosing a new president, lawmakers and local officials on August 8th. The presidential race between incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga is a tight one. On Wednesday, Raila claimed the ruling party could only win if it rigged the results, touching upon a sensitive topic at a time of mounting political tension.
Outgoing Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta on the campaign trail in the capital, Nairobi. The leader of the Jubilee Alliance is seeking a second and final 5-year term in tightly contested elections. His main rival, the veteran campaigner Raila Odinga, claims that votes in previous elections were stolen from him, and he accuses the president of planning to rig next week's vote. Odinga, in turn, is accused of attempting to stoke violence. The elections come as East Africa's largest economy is suffering from rising debt, high unemployment and soaring inflation.
If you're earning $100 a month, $50 you spend on food, food inflation is 20–25%, you've got very little left.
Although public investment has helped spur the economy, experts say corruption is endemic.
The entire political system costs too much, but the pay, the amount of government bureaucrats, the cost of running that government, the overspending, the corruption that's involved in there.
Political analysts have warned about the possibility of further unrest in the final days of the campaign after a senior election official was tortured and murdered. Presidential polls have turned violent in the past. More than 1,000 people were killed and 600,000 others displaced during 2 months of ethnic clashes following the disputed elections of 2007.
Well, thousands of anti-government protesters took to the streets of Guinea Conakry on Wednesday, demanding that President Alpha Condé set a date for the first local elections in 12 years. Former Prime Minister and opposition leader Cellou Dalein Diallo led marches. He accuses Condé of undermining democracy and of electoral fraud in past presidential votes. Now, Condé was first voted in 2010 and was returned to power in 2015, but angered his critics when promised local elections didn't go ahead. Well, Rwandans will be going to the polls on Friday for their presidential election, and the outcome is almost already a certainty. The incumbent, Paul Kagame, won over 90% of the vote in 2003 and 2010 and is set for another landslide victory. Human rights groups have long alleged Kagame and his ruling party make it impossible for alternative voices to get their message heard by the closely controlled electorate. Our correspondents report.
The show of force, always so impressive. Tens of thousands gather for a now daily spectacle. Famous artists warm up the crowds for the president. Everyone here sings from the same hymn sheet.
I came to support Paul Kagame because he stopped the genocide. He brought peace. He built houses for the poor.
The president has no doubt that he will win.
On August the 4th, this is just a formality.
2 years ago, a referendum amending the constitution to allow Kagame to serve up to 3 more elected terms was won with 98% of the vote. So Friday's poll is a foregone conclusion. But for human rights activists, Rwanda is a repressive regime.
Of the 98%, there may be those who wanted this option, others who voted yes because they wanted a quiet life, and some who dared not to vote for fear of reprisals. And all that in a context where there's very little political space.
The ruling party's posters monopolise billboards, the opposition relegated to the sidelines. Independent candidate Philippe Mpeyimana holds an impromptu roadside rally. Earlier, his campaigning was blocked.
The local authorities don't understand what an opposition is, and certain members of the ruling party have acted beyond their authority.
At first sight, Rwanda appears unreservedly behind its president. But with free speech so restricted, how is it possible to measure Kagame's true popularity? A question that remains largely unspoken here.
In South Sudan, at least 4 people were killed on the main road between Juba and the Ugandan border on Wednesday. Now, the ambush was claimed by the rebel group that makes up one side of the civil conflict that has racked the country for almost 4 years. Although millions of South Sudanese have fled the violence, some, though, have found the uncertainty of displacement too much to bear and are risking the return. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
When South Sudan's civil war broke out in 2013, many residents fled Malakal. Last year there were violent clashes here, but slowly residents are returning to the country's second largest city. Elisa came back and now runs a tea stall.
Some say there are no people who live in Malakal. I'm here, and I want to tell them there are no problems here, and people do live here. I advise anyone who left Malakal to go to Sudan or to camps for the displaced to return, because in the long run, Malakal belongs to us all.
The UN mission in South Sudan has increased its activities in Malakal, especially those covering human rights and child protection, to encourage more people to return to the town.
I've been engaging with the women for several months, and the one message that I continuously hear is that they want peace. They want peace for themselves, their family, and most importantly, so that their children can return to school and that they can develop a prosperous and peaceful future.
If some have started to return to Malakal, many others have fled their homes. Nearly 2 million South Sudanese have gone to neighbouring nations, and about 2 million others are displaced within the country. It's the biggest movement of people in Africa since the 1994 genocide in Rwanda.
Well, activists in Egypt have long been pushing for more to be done to support people with disabilities in the country. Discrimination and exclusion affects their chances at employment and even education. But there are hopes that attitudes are slowly starting to change.
Greeting her daughter outside a school south of Cairo, Rada is bursting with pride. Logine has Down syndrome, but her mother wanted her to have a standard education. The 18-year-old sat her end-of-year exam like any other high schooler, something that took years of fighting in a country where people with mental disabilities are often marginalized and receive little assistance.
For secondary school, which was the most difficult, and I wanted her to have a middle school education too, but rules didn't allow it.
Hoda's 4-year-old son Yassine also has Down syndrome. Today they're at the City Center, a section of Catholic charity Caritas, to take part in some activities. When she gave birth, she says hospital staff advised her to isolate the baby and limit his contact with others. At City, she was taught the opposite and urged to integrate Yassine into the daily life of his family.
Some people are uncomfortable around him. If we're sitting in the metro and he's sitting on my lap and his leg touches someone else's, they move away from him and they brush off the spot that he touched. But other people tell me they know he has Down syndrome and they pat him on the back and tell me he's a blessing from God and that I should take good care of him.
Out of Egypt's population of around 93 million, an estimated 14 million have some form of disability. 3/4 of them have a mental disability, and the organizations helping them are few and far between. One of the biggest struggles they face is tackling ignorance around mental disability and the stigma it carries.
And finally, fans of South African Kwaito star Mixon Sekeleke Tolo have been paying tribute to his music and his life after he passed away on Tuesday night. He died of complications from diabetes, of which he had been diagnosed years ago, but apparently had said that he would prefer to choose life over necessary amputations. The musician became a household name with his song Fatty Boom Boom, but his entire backlog has attracted a lot of support and created a lot of enjoyment for Kwaito fans in South Africa. So we'll leave you with sounds of Sekeleke. Thanks for joining us.
The Observer's Direct, presented by Derek Thompson.
The pine forests of northern Ukraine, devastated by illegal mining. Amber can be worth $5,000 a kilo, and our observers say it's led to a ruthless business, deep in the heart of the forest, pitting miners against the police, with the forest losing out. It's on the next Observer's Direct.
The Observer's Direct, on France 24 and France24.com.